Emily Faber is a senior at Hutchinson School in Memphis, Tennessee. Chosen as one of 26 North Americans for the Bronfman Youth Fellowship, she spent 6 weeks in Israel this summer, meeting with various speakers, studying texts, and engaging in discussions. She also journeyed to Israel the summer of 2014 with the National Conference of Synagogue Youth and teaches Sunday school at Temple Israel in Memphis. During her presentation, Emily plans to discuss her perspective on Israel and Palestine's relationship during her most recent experience in Israel. Emily additionally co-founded and operates the Jewish Pluralistic Youth Organization, which seeks to unite the various Jewish denominations of Memphis through programs, Shabbat dinners, and discussions. Please welcome Emily to describe her journey of self-discovery this past summer with her generations in Israel.
The danger with Neverland is that we don't have a stake in what goes on there. Sure, it's interesting to note that Peter Pan almost got captured by Captain Hook, and we'll cluck sympathetically when the Lost Boys get in a run with an alligator, but in truth, we don't really care. Because Neverland never really feels real. And unless Peter Pan himself climbs through our bedroom window with a pouch full of fairy dust and takes us by the hand and leads us there, Neverland remains a deposit of dreams. An inscrutable, imaginary land from which bedtime stories are born. Growing up, Israel had been my Neverland. Sure, I knew it existed, the maps told me so, but for some reason it never felt real. As a Jew, I knew it as the holiest place on earth, but for some reason I pictured it as this Jewish Disney world in which rabbis would just kind of like run around and grandmothers would make matzo ball soup and Hebrew was everywhere. Cultured kid, I know. But so believe it or not, a couple summers ago, I had the chance to go to Neverland. And that initial trip was every bit as magical as I had hoped it would be. That trip was geared towards exploring the land and really introducing us to Israel because many of us had never been before. You know, we floated in the Dead Sea, we rode camels, it was really fun. And by doing so, Neverland became more real to me. But I still held it on this pedestal in which I refused to contemplate the ills the nation and the region were facing. Flash forward, last summer, Peter Pan himself asked me to go back to Neverland with him. I was one of 26 North Americans chosen for the Bronfman Youth Fellowship, which included an all-expense-paid 6-week program in Israel in which we studied text and I met with speakers ranging from poets to politicians and military experts to journalists. And the point of that trip was to really get us analyzing our world and who we are in it and to get us asking questions. So I got on the plane to Israel, flew past the second star to the right and straight on till morning, and what I hadn't anticipated was that my Israel, my Neverland, had changed. June 12th, 3 Israeli teens were abducted along the West Bank, which is a portion of land east of Israel home to 2.6 million Palestinians. July 1st, the day we flew to Israel for the fellowship, the world discovered that these 3 Israeli teens were dead. And the group that claimed responsibility for this attack was Hamas, which is an Islamist, extremist, political group and terrorist organization intent on replacing Israel with a Palestinian state. And Israelis and Palestinians have been at odds for a while now, but especially since Israel was established as a Jewish state in 1948. However, this event incited a surge in violence. So we were entering Israel during an emotional time, one of grief and frustration and anger and loss. And when we landed in Tel Aviv, Israel's capital, we were immediately directed to Jerusalem to divert us from the rallies in the streets. And most people were advocating for peace and asking people not to take vengeance on stray Palestinians merely for the actions of an extreme terrorist group. However, still in that crowd, there was the small voice of hatred, the signs that said death to Arabs. And we would later see this thirst for vengeance played out with the burning of a Muslim teenager outside of a mosque. So, as more time passed, I realized that my Neverland really wasn't what I had remembered from before, but I was so intent on holding on to this idealistic Israel of my dreams that I didn't even take the first siren seriously. You know, the one that tells you that there's a rocket coming, so you should get in a bunker? Yeah, it didn't register on me. And most of us didn't take that one seriously either. We literally thought that it was an app on our security director's phone and that he was testing us to make sure we knew what to do. So we heard it and we were like, all right, we'll get in the shelter or whatever. And we get in and we continue talking and laughing. And at one point, I look over at our security director and I notice that he's laughing, which I found odd. So I asked him, Yossi, this is real, isn't it? And he was like, yeah, it is. And he was laughing at the fact that none of us could fathom anything like this actually happening to us. And suddenly, Neverland wasn't so far away. It existed, and I existed in it. After the sixth siren, I no longer considered the war as a joke. Each day we would read the newspapers to read the latest death tolls of Palestinians and Israelis, and read about the latest ceasefires which would inevitably be broken every time. But the fact of the matter is that Bronfman took every preventive measure to ensure our utmost safety at all times, so I was never actually in any real danger. But that state of safety wasn't exactly conveyed over American news outlets, so each week I would get texts from friends and family asking me, are you all right? Are you okay? Do you feel safe? My dad even offered to fly me home as if it were some party that he could pick me up from in the middle of the night. The fact of the matter was that I was going home in a few weeks, but what was really invaluable was talking to the people who had been through this stuff their entire lives and would continue to do so long after I was gone. One Israeli girl I talked to lived near Gaza where the attacks were heaviest, and she talked about how she had never felt so afraid to sleep in her own bed. Another teen I talked to had actually stayed with me the previous summer on this exchange program thing, and he stayed in my home, and here he was showing me a picture of a rocket that had landed 5 meters away from his home. To those people, the death tolls weren't just numbers. They were potential brothers, sisters, boyfriends, and cousins. When I went to Israel this summer, I didn't anticipate this full-fledged war. I really didn't think it would be any different than floating in the Dead Sea and riding camels. I didn't allow myself to realize that people were going to die. And at one point in our journey, 6 of us were told that we could go to the funeral of an officer who had died while we were in the country. And I really wanted to go. But some of the people in my group were all like, you don't know Hebrew, you're not going to understand what's going on, let someone else go who can decipher what will actually be being said. I went anyway because I was going to this funeral to mourn for a life, regardless of his nationality or religious background or political stance or language. And that experience has haunted me and will stay with me for the rest of my life. The first thing, I still remember so clearly that the first thing I noticed was the sheer number of people who had come to this funeral. 3,000 easily. And there were people, all of the roads were congested, there were people in all these apartment windows and, hanging off of roofs, and there were all types of people too. There was the ultra-Orthodox Jew with his robe to the floor and the big top hat, standing next to the girl with a miniskirt, standing next to the mother with her child and an elderly couple. And so we took our place amongst this array of people and listened to what the speakers were saying. And at first, my teacher began translating for me. And he talked about how the officer's father was now describing his son's contagious smile, and how his son never tolerated a mean word said against another human being. And then he translated how the officer's fiancée was reading the poem that they had included in their wedding invitation. And after a while, my teacher couldn't keep translating for me because he was sobbing so much. And so I had to listen for myself, which is exactly what I did. I listened to his story and I cried for that officer. I cried so hard for him. This summer taught me what it means to elevate the status of a stranger to that of a friend. someone you could know and care about. Understand the depths of their ambitions, what excites them, what frightens them, their relationships. Because the only way to disenchant yourself from believing in Neverland is to tap into this understanding of asking people their stories. Because if you believe in Neverland, if you believe that it's this distant dream, this distant nation, then there are no implications to the headlines you see in the news or the death tolls you hear in passing. And this way, if you tap into this understanding, suddenly you have a friend you care enough to text to see if she's all right, if she's okay, if she feels safe. Suddenly, you care. But, Peter Pan doesn't have to come crashing through your window in order for you to care about Neverland. It's so hard for human beings to care about things that we feel we don't personally have a stake in. But the problem with that statement is that we've convinced ourselves we somehow don't have a stake in it, when in fact we do. We were no different than the Israelis we met this summer, only our nations and circumstances of birth really differed. And yet, I couldn't help wondering, no offense, Mom and Dad, I couldn't help wondering if my parents would have watched the news and cared what happened in Israel as much as they did if their own child hadn't been there. What if we cared about other nations as if our own children were there? Unfortunately, believing in Neverland not only allows apathy and indifference to breed, but it allows hatred to fester. We don't ask people in Neverland what it's like to live there. We don't even give them a chance to tell their stories. And yet, if you don't ask other people and other cultures their stories, then it's so much easier to dehumanize them, to torture them, to throw rockets over the border at them, because it's us versus them. So what's keeping us from doing what we do best, which is being storytellers? Well, there's this initial fear that we don't speak the same language, that we come from different worlds, different zip codes, different schools. I won't be able to understand you, literally or metaphorically. But the fact of the matter is that I watched 3,000 people cry for someone that they probably didn't know. And I myself took part in this. Why? Because I listened to his story and I allowed him to become someone I could care about. I don't pretend to be some expert in the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. I could tell you my personal political views, but I don't think that would serve our purpose, because there are literally hundreds of thousands of views on how to achieve peace in the Middle East. And hearing mine won't make a dent, but what I can do is tell you my story, and I can listen to yours, so that I'm no longer that Jew who went to Israel and you're no longer a stranger. Remember this when people or hate groups, whether it's on college campus or in the workroom or wherever you are, remember this when those people try to make widespread assumptions about a group of people, like all Israelis are racist and for an apartheid state, or all Muslims are terrorists, or all black teenagers are up to no good. Because this is simply false. Each individual person has a story that separates them from the mass spread of prejudices that we tend to make up for other cultures. And it's easy to make assumptions about Neverland and the people who live there if you've never even been. So shut your windows to the delusion of a Peter Pan. There is no Neverland. But there are real people. Palestinians, Israelis, Syrians, Memphians, there are real people who are living in the middle of war and deprivation. There are people who want the same things that you do, to raise their children in safety and comfort, to live a life without fear, to worship as they choose. So don't be a lost boy stuck in your own story, stuck in your own world. It's time to grow up. Thank you.